This is Offplanet Radio. This is Offplanet Radio.
Welcome to Offplanet Radio Live for Wednesday night, August 1st, 2012. I'm Randy Moggins, and we have our guest on the line tonight. It looks like, well, we'll just knock on wood. Everything goes okay, because anytime at all, things can blow up around here, but it looks good so far. On the website this week, I want to talk a little bit about this. I just posted tonight an interview with Sarah Stanga, who is a survivor of ritual abuse, alien abduction, and ritualistic practices by the elite. It's a two-part interview. Miranda Kelly sat in on that. We recorded that on Sunday. Energy and prayers for Sarah right now. She got hit very hard after we did this interview. We got hit hard doing the interview. Also, a couple articles on the blog. We've been following the James Holmes saga. This is a tragedy on every level, and there's more coming out now about this. So check out those articles. Give me some feedback on the articles as well. Also, an article I posted this morning, Two Timely Views, Remote Viewing, and 2013, which is, I think, something we're going to talk about. Hopefully I can get these guys on, Courtney Brown and Gerald O'Donnell, two premium remote viewers, and also Cliff High has weighed in on this as well. The remote viewers are seeing some very dark things coming in 2013, not 2012, and we're going to examine those views more on the blog and hopefully on the radio show as well. Without further ado, my guest is on the line. Her name is Eva Lorgen, and she is an author, paranormal investigator, and a counselor as well into all sorts of phenomena. Evie, good evening and welcome.
Oh, thank you for having me, Randy.
Oh, it's wonderful to get you on. I've looked at a lot of your work, and I'm very delighted to be here. You fit into this universe very well, given the subjects that we talk about. And
yes.
You have a new book coming out. And
I do.
Maybe we'll just talk about that a little bit first, because this is some pretty deep stuff we got on here. The Dark Side of Cupid. Okay, so
yeah, I mean, well, I could just go ahead and shoot, or is there anything else that you want to say? I mean, I think it relates to a lot of the kind of shows that you've had on, because you kind of talk about some of the more anomalous things that happen to people with respect to mind control, the paranormal things, or shamanic healing. So I think this fits in pretty well. This is my second book. The first book was The Love Bite, which was primarily about what I discovered working with people who've had multiple alien visitations and what I call the abduction histories. And just to give you a little overview so you'll know why I wrote the next book, and what I learned is I became interested in alien abduction research because of my own experiences and paranormal things in my own life. And so I started working with people, like I had a support group in San Diego County since 1994, or actually before that as well, and started working with people who've had alien abductions, and corresponded with other researchers like the late Dr. Carla Turner and Barbara Bartholik, and learned about, actually I observed that many alien abductees, or if they want to call themselves experiencers or contactees, it really doesn't matter, that the entities in their life actually were influencing them quite a bit and sometimes manipulating them in ways that were unfavorable. And I noticed this in relationships where they were setting up love relationships or breaking them up or doing things to create psychic links and heavy linking between people. So a lot of times this manifested as like love obsessions or incredible psychic linking between abductees, where the aliens apparently bonded them earlier in life several times so that by the time they met later in life, they would have a very powerful connection, a deja vu, and a soulmate kind of feeling that went with it. But oftentimes what went with that situation also was a kind of obsession, unrequited love, a lot of chaos, emotional roller coaster stuff, or unconsummated love, which seemed kind of incongruent with what we thought that the aliens were doing. We thought the aliens would be putting people together for a genetic issue of children, which sometimes they do, but it seemed that there was more involved, which had to do with, either studying emotions or actually literally feeding off them. And so that, I believe, is actually more of what's going on, and there's a spiritual component, which I described in the early days as a kind of disruption and spiritual warfare, especially with people who wanted to know the truth of their experiences and were seeking the truth and doing healing journeys to find out exactly what happened. And then in the midst of, let's say, their healing process of really trying to find out what happened, then they would be assailed with all these disruptions, maybe harassment, spiritual warfare, psychic attack, or being set up with what I call the love bite partner. So there's different reasons, why this happened, and I go into that in my first book. So that in this book, The Dark Side of Cupid, it's not necessarily about alien abductions or abductee people or experiencers, although many of them experience paranormal things in this particular kind of situation, which is they feel like their love relationship was somehow interfered with or set up or staged by a supernatural source. And so in the book I go into, what are the main parameters of how to tell, is your relationship, had it been set up? And is this person really your soulmate? Because in most of the cases it felt like a soulmate situation, but as it progressed, it maybe really wasn't, and it was more of a manipulation on either, quote, aliens or some kind of other dimensional entity. So I don't exactly say in this second book that it's, quote, aliens doing it, because it's not always clear. And in my view, I believe that there's entities that may mask behind certain images, and they may use many forms. And so Cupid could be many different kinds of entities and be a kind of interloper in our relationships, and they could set up good ones, or sometimes they could set up bad ones. So it's very fascinating. One of the main components that I discovered later, like a type of relationship, because people come to me because of an anomalous relationship. They think, is this a love bite, or maybe they've had unusual alien abductions or interference or things like that. So most of the people who come to me now, it's because of a relationship issue that there's some unusual thing going on.
So the relationships themselves are tied to past anomalous activities. Generally, these people are either part of like a secret project or ritual abuse or ET interference. Is that the case?
Yeah. In fact, about 60% of them in this book were people who believed themselves to have at least one alien visitation, although they weren't always certain that it was, quote, the aliens that were responsible, although I suspect that's the case. But in this particular book, it wasn't, how shall I say it, 100% of the people were those who were involved in some kind of alternative research, media, thinking outside the box. They were truth seekers, those who were involved in either paranormal, spirituality, conspiracy, New Age, and just thinking outside the box, like truth seekers, like alternative media, truth seeker kind of people.
Right.
And so not all of them were, fit into what I call I don't even want to pigeonhole them. They weren't all like classic alien abductees. And some of them were people who didn't have those histories at all. And then they had a relationship that was just like so unusual with these unusual parameters, which I'll describe. which suggests that the relationship was set up by a paranormal supernatural source. And in most of the cases, the one in my book, there was what I believe a form of energy vampirism, which could have been like mild emotional vampirism, which like a lot of drama, to like a more severe psychic vampirism to the point of like physical exhaustion and near death and like severe psychological injury. So in the book, I go through many case histories where it ranges from a milder, annoying kind of thing to like the more severe cases. So it's really a mind opener because it shows on a very distinct relationship level, when you have this kind of interference, you'll be able to recognize it for what it is. And it's not a simple emotional vampire kind of thing or a simple psychic vampire kind of thing. It's more or less what I call an interference, which I call in the book, it could be what I call a paranormal viral factor, when we're really not sure what kind of being or entity or energy is interfering, or it could actually be an entity that is witnessed and you know what it is, like what we call a fourth dimensional lizard reptilian kind of entity. So in the different case studies, there were like what I call the third party entity that is associated with one or both partners that is somewhat responsible for either setting up the relationship or interfering with it in some way to create certain kinds of symptoms and things that I describe in the book, like, you know, paranormal magical things, or the feeling that, you know, this is your soulmate, a deja vu, maybe a psychic told you you're going to meet your soulmate or your twin flame, and, you know, magical synchronicities and that kind of thing. And then there may be what I call the emotional highs and lows, or some kind of emotional vampirism. And then the third factor would be what I call the emotional manipulation, or the psychopathology kind of factor, where there's definitely some kind of malevolent entity overshadowing one of the partners that is responsible for the weirdness, like the weirdness in the relationship. So this isn't
just a straight ahead. This isn't just like the lover from hell kind of scenario.
No. And, you know, many people say, well, how can you tell if this is just like a regular relationship thing and you're just kind of making it up? And truly, this is distinct and it is real and it is identifiable, which is why I wrote the book. In fact, one of the reasons in the beginning, I actually wanted to design the book for a more mainstream audience, or at least one that understood a little bit about emotional vampirism and the paranormal, and not so much focus it on ufology or alien abductions, because many people just shy away from that. They don't want to read about it. And I wanted to be able to get this out in the mainstream in such a way that people could recognize it for what it is. And so it's a type of, I think it's a type of invasion and possession or overshadowing that happens through an alien force, which we could call in a Gnostic sense, like the archontic viral factor.
Okay.
Or it could be like a reptilian fourth dimensional entity feeding off the emotional and sexual energies. Sometimes that is directly witnessed by someone who is like clairvoyant enough to be able to perceive that. And other times it's just some kind of spirit, or a gargoyle spirit, or a troll spirit, or a nondescript shadow being that is noticed or felt in some way associated with one of the partners. Or it could be a thing where, let's say, one of the partners is involved in channeling, and it's as if the beings that they are channeling are somehow orchestrating and working the relationship in such a way that they make these partners kind of play out mythic dramas and themes where a lot of emotional energy is expended. So it's almost as if when we look at the gods, for example, the ancient gods like Cupid and Venus and these ancient gods, how they would play with humanity like it was a pawns on a chessboard, and playing with their emotions. And so I really believe that there's something to that, and that this is much more ancient, really, than the extraterrestrial hypothesis, that this could be very ancient and be under different window dressings. So it's a way to recognize it for what it is. And I think it does boil down to a kind of soul energy vampirism. And so that's what I wanted to portray in this book so that people could definitely recognize it for what it is, because there are unusual things happening that go beyond the classic, this is just like a really weird relationship and this person's an emotional vampire or whatever. I mean, this is definitely distinct and real. So I don't know how it will be received, but I think when people read the book and get a flavor, especially looking at the case studies, they're going to say, oh yeah, now I recognize this, and they'll start thinking in their past, like, wow, I never thought of it that way.
We all deal with what we call emotional vampirism, and the term, you're talking about it from the level of romantic sexual type engagement. I think anybody, and certainly I've experienced it being in the public eye for so many years, there are just people who come into your life that eventually, if you allowed them, they would literally suck you dry, and they can do it on any number of different levels. And so, the awareness of this, I don't even think is all that great, because I don't think most people have an awareness of their own energy levels. And I'm talking about the general public now, not the people who are aware of the phenomena that we talk about. But the average person on the street is not aware of how open they are in terms of keeping their energy channels open, of how they're attacked. And I've seen this with people who have gone through all kinds of traumas and ordeals, and you find out eventually that they're just wide open, everything's coming in, they have no defense mechanisms, and basically they have no way to even identify the phenomena we're talking about. So emotional vampirism, how would we define that? What are some of the signs of that?
Well, that's a good question, because emotional vampirism it's like a range of behaviors and needs based on the level of connection to the core and how much they feel loved and connected. So I could see it as strictly like a human phenomena of how well integrated they are with their own psyche, and but then what I'm talking about is actually there is definitely a supernatural interference that's beyond the normal human range of normal experience. But I can't understand what you're saying. I mean, I could see that if someone is emotionally happy and they're connected to the core, they realize more and more of their true divine nature, which is love and compassion and connection. So when that feeling, that satisfying feeling of love and connection to the divine sources, you won't need to keep needing it from others in a grasping kind of way. But if someone doesn't feel loved, they're disconnected from their core, they have a lot of unhealed wounds, they may seek it outside themselves to the point of just like really annoying other people, like borderline personalities, for example. And that does happen. A lot of them, like the classic emotional vampire, you could see like the drama queen, who's a borderline personality or whatever. And it could be just because of their own unhealed wounds and their disconnection to their inner core based on lack of healing and integration. And that could be like a classic emotional vampirism with no paranormal stuff at all. But then when you get to the more paranormal stuff, this is when, let's say, the nth degree of psychic vampirism would be, let's say, a narcissistic personality disorder who got overshadowed and taken over by a malevolent other dimensional entity. So they became fully hosted. And once they became fully hosted or possessed by this being, the being's purpose and mode of feeding is feeding on other people's energy, simply because these kinds of beings are somehow disconnected from the divine source, which is why they feed.
So so we're talking here about symbiosis. In other words, both parties, the flesh and blood beings who are engaged in this particular love affair, which is really a triangle when you bring in the spiritual side of it, both parties are feeding off of their own negative aspects. You mentioned the narcissist, for example. I've had Thomas Sheridan on a couple of times who has talked in depth about the psychopath. And, Thomas has done a great job of documenting how a psychopath can just go through your life like a windstorm and destroy you. But this goes above that because
this goes beyond that. It's like it would be as a shaman, let's say, or a spiritual person who has clairvoyant perception, understands the spiritual other dimensional world, what we will perceive, excuse me, and I go through this in the book, is that once there are certain windows of vulnerability with a person, such as severe unhealed wounds, or let's say dabbling in black magic, or, reptilian entities, then they could be overshadowed or linked to one of these malevolent beings that in turn use them as a psychic vampire, but it's like they're actually piggybacking on the person to use them as an organic portal to suck energy from other people. And so the sexual contact and the romantic contact is the most efficient means of energy vampirism.
So the entity itself is orchestrating and then feeding off of this energy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's a way that you can tell, which is why it's not just a simple emotional vampirism relationship issue. This appears to be happening, and I go into this in the book that, if 100% of the people who reported this were involved in some kind of alternative media, truth-seeking, spirituality, conspiracy. Let's say these were people who really wanted to know the truth and went after it, or they were whistleblowers, or they're people seeking the truth with all their heart and soul. And it's like they are being attacked and disrupted because of their truth-seeking efforts or whistleblowing efforts. So in those cases, I would say that when they get involved with something like this, it's actually an attack. It's like being sent a Romeo agent who is a psychopath hosted by a malevolent, let's say, reptilian entity to basically disrupt their life and suck them dry and throw them off their path. And indeed, this has happened many times with people who report these things to me. It's a form of disruption. But not all the, quote, alien love bite people who reported this have the same syndrome. So in the Dark Side of the Cupid, it's a little bit different. It's more about energy vampirism, whereas in the alien love bite, it's more about how the aliens set people up and bonded them throughout life to have a very strong, powerful connection, then seem to play these people like pawns in a chessboard for the emotional highs and lows. But it's not the people's fault. Like, you wouldn't want to label the, quote, alien abductee as a psychic vampire, because it's really not their fault. It's the aliens playing them like puppets, basically.
Are these partners that are sent into these situations, and I won't limit it to whistleblowers and truth seekers, but I would think this would be a dominant target. Are these people basically like handlers or controllers that are sent in?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. Many of them are. Like in the, what I call the Milab abductee situation, where the Milab is often used as an agent in black ops under mind control and, let's say, alien technology environments. Very often, this is classic. The Milab female abductee or male abductee gets sent a partner, a controlling partner who sometimes acts as a handler, or they may be a sleeper who's controlled indirectly to basically keep that person under control and in the program and programmed. So the partner basically keeps them under control so they never get on a healing path, never become aware, and break programming. So this happens very much so with people who are in mind control programs. Very much so.
So what would be the first sign to somebody, let's say, who is in a whistleblower mode or truth movement and has this effect going on in their life? Somebody has come into their life, and that person tends to be controlling. That person tends to bring a certain energy to bear. And I'm guessing this person is a consistent or inconsistent presence over a long period of time.
Yes. And sometimes it depends on the awareness of the person. Like if they have a good sense of awareness with energy, they may notice, for example, that this person can psychically link in very easily with you and enter your dreams and do what I call the psychic dream walking or the astral sex liaisons, or they seem to have a link into you that is more powerful than should be for that kind of relationship. Like what's described in these relationships is a more unnatural, very powerful psychic linking, which is out of proportion for the the true love and connection that should be between them, which would suggest psychic vampirism. In fact, one of the symptoms of a psychic vampire who is effective in doing what they do is a very strong psychic, telepathic, empathic linking between them and the partner. And if the partner is unaware of, quote, the psy-vamp, they may fall obsessively in love with them because they've never experienced such a connection with a kind of person. And many times it's very arousing. I mean, it's these psychic vampires, let's say, who are overshadowed by, let's say, a reptilian entity, and that's like the nth degree. That's like the hardcore cases that I got. These entities who host and overshadow have a very good ability to psychic link and actually even activate the kundalini of the partner even at a distance. So they don't even have to require sexual physical contact. And very often this entity can astrally link in with the partner, like just astral travel out of the body, whatever you want to call it, and then activate them sexually to a very unnatural degree. And it's like what a black magician could do. So it, begs the question, there's like black magicians out there doing this. Because indeed, I think that's the case. There was a case in my book where one of the gals, her, quote, love bite partner, did use Egyptian magic rituals to create a love spell. And as this thing unfolded, it unfolded in a very, very powerful love spell connection between the two, but there were entities involved that seemed to play them like puppets in a mythic drama theme kind of thing. And it was very exhausting for the female partner, who she got ill for many years as a result of this. So it has many similarities with black magic if people know how to recognize it for what it is. So I do think this is related in many ways, though, to the alien presence and what some of the, at least the malevolent ones, are doing with their long-term study. It's more of a vampirism issue, in my view. Like, it has to do with the soul. And so this is why I wanted to show, well, this is how it's manifesting in a relationship. And oftentimes there's people, let's say, that they felt true love with someone else, and then they were disrupted from the true love, and then the beings who were interfering kept trying to match them up with what I call the cookie-cutter counterfeit soulmate partner. So there's many different situations that I go into in the book where there's disruption of true love and then trying to set up these people with, like, the false soulmate partner. And then there's those that it's just a love bite kind of situation where they're set up with a partner that's interfered with by some kind of third-party entity. And it's pretty apparent if you know how to recognize paranormal and supernatural interference. So this is why it really goes above and beyond emotional vampirism, but it helps to understand emotional vampirism. And I understand it as, if the more disconnected one is from their core and from the divine essence of what we really are and our truest essence, the more connected we are, the more we feel loved, that we don't have to, quote, take it or need it from others as much. But if you're really disconnected and not connected to the core, then you're going to want to need attention, constant attention. So if you look at psychopathology, like what Thomas Sheridan talks about, it's like would be like the classic narcissist. But my view is what he's really talking about, what he's really seeing. He may be observing some of the paranormal stuff and some of the what I call the reptilian-hosted ones, but maybe he's just not knowing it. He's
not comfortable with the subject. I actually, the last time I interviewed him, I kind of went head-on with him, and he's not comfortable with that yet. I think he's getting there. I think he'll break that out over time. Everybody has a limitation on this, and some people it takes a long time to come around to. But I think he recognizes the syndrome. You take it to another level in terms of projecting it into what I will call astral engagement of entities. And this kind of goes to the dark side of occult activity. And when I say occult, I don't mean that judgmentally. I consider occult activity to be both positive and negative. We can engage in many things, many of the psychic skills, clairvoyance, astral projection, even the kundalini and things like that, but we have to do it under the shield of what you talked about earlier, this divine connection. And really, we have to anchor that with a really strong sense of self. So,
and it's amazing. I mean, I'm even amazed at the people who report this to me, people who are like really powerful women, for example, powerful women healers who were like not even people who had trauma backgrounds or abductions or anything, who had come to me with this, and they were absolutely shocked and disturbed that they ran into a partner who was one of these like reptilian host psychopath types, like a bad love bite situation, and they were absolutely shocked that this even could exist with someone as quote, well together as they were. And so in many of these cases, like, you don't have to be necessarily a victim who's got all these open windows open. Sometimes you're literally a target because of the light that you project because of your light. You know, like if you're a really good healer and you're full of a light, sometimes these beings will zero in on you just because of the light. So, and then they'll try to disrupt you or basically just feed because, you know, you're a good source. So truly, there's a predatory aspect here with you know, the dark side of Cupid, and so we don't always. It's not always because we're vulnerable or we did something wrong or because we're a victim. Although the ones who had more serious trauma usually had the worst quote relationships, which is understandable. There was more vulnerability windows open for them to be vulnerable to that kind of thing. So a large part of the book, I mean, I go into the healing aspect and how to recognize this, how to deal with it, how to apply paranormal intervention strategies and relationship, you know, communication so that you can basically close those vulnerable windows and those blind spots so that you're not like a target of this kind of thing. Because it can happen to anybody. It can happen to the best of us, you know. And it really defies a lot of the classic DSM psychology explanations. And even in psychopathology, it defies this. This is something new and goes beyond classic psychopathology. It's truly a type of, well, you can call it demonic, but I don't always like to use those terms because I think there's many things going on from a range in other dimensional reality.
Yeah.
So once someone can perceive energy and clairvoyantly perceive and know how to deal with this, because oftentimes, you know, the client had to come to me to find out what to do and had to go to a shaman or use other methods that classic counseling techniques just wouldn't cut the mustard, you know, that it don't work. Because what you need is a paranormal intervention strategy or a shaman or ways to, you know, cut psychic links or break these black magic spells. Because these entities can be really, really difficult. So I really appreciated hearing your interview with Steve Richards because I think some of what he dealt with is similar to what is being reported to me, although I'm using maybe slightly different strategies that's related to my specialty in alien abduction.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So, but I think there's a crossover here with some of the paranormal things. So that's why I'm not saying it's all extraterrestrial. I think there's something ancient going on that may go back to the ancient gods.
That's interesting. So, what about past life influences? Do you ever delve into that at all, Eva?
Yeah. In fact, many of the people who reported like an alien love bite situation where they knew that they've had alien visitations, sometimes they're aliens who were setting them up when they were allowed to be conscious, actually told them that they were setting them up with this particular partner because they had a karmic connection of previous lifetimes, and that when these aliens did this, they actually had the ability to perceive energetically on these subtle levels that they were like energy tendrils that connected different kinds of people, and that these aliens could tell when someone had a karmic connection with someone, and then they would use that to exploit and catalyze a stronger, quote, love-bite connection.
See, to me, that feels like the ultimate rush, so to speak, in terms of a romantic relationship.
Oh, yeah.
But somebody you encounter, and this is like the soulmate on steroids because now there's a past life connection. And anybody that's ever experienced this knows that there's this subtle feeling in the background. I'm imagining that this whole thing plays out on a level where somebody's literally reading you, and like very soon you're comparing memories, and it becomes like this whole scenario where it's like we were soulmates carved out in time, and I've heard that from people before, and I've heard this from abductees and from people who are dealing with traumatic abuse situations.
But oftentimes oftentimes they really have had connections. But I think that the aliens or whoever's behind this, sometimes it's a black magician, who in an Illuminati family kind of situation, who knows. But I don't want to get involved in that because that's kind of complex. But they can do that because they could know who will have a connection, and then they just kind of help it along with the entities they're invoking to help things along. But other times, I believe that the aliens or even Milab handlers, in cases of Milabs, and Milab I mean they're a genuine alien abductee who has military abductions or visitations where they're used as an operative in different environments under mind control in alter personality mode, but sometimes as if it's astrally or a virtual reality scenario. Oftentimes what they'll do is they'll show them scenarios of, let's say, past life things, and then they'll like show them on a holographic screen or in a dream, okay, this was you. They're basically trying to say this was you in a past life and this was your partner, and they'll show you that you guys had a connection and somehow it's supposed to catalyze all these feelings, but that doesn't mean that's true. Like, unless the person really realizes it deep in their soul and they remember, then maybe it's a true thing. But a lot of times they can just give you a con job to make you believe something to keep that couple connected for some reason. Now, and it depends on the situation.
Those kind of connections, generally the way you're perceiving them and chronicling them in this book, are malignant relationships. I'm comfortable talking about this, but I think about Duncan O'Finian and Miranda, and they've been very public about how they were paired inside of the projects that they were in, and they've worked through their issues for a number of years. And I mean, I know them personally. I've had a chance to watch them interact, and they've developed what I would consider to be a very loving healthy relationship, mutually supporting, and they're fighting the same battle. But my sense is in a lot of cases it's the opposite of that.
Well, yeah, and in fact in the book I go into, there are some cases where people are being connected, but they're nurturing that connection because it's powerful and it's good, amidst to sometimes disruption or paranormal activity, but they're working on it together. And when both partners are aware and dedicated to work it out, they can work it out so it could be a really good thing. And there are other people who've had good connections, so it's not all, quote, bad, but I think it takes an incredible degree of awareness and dedication to work out when you're being disrupted and attacked or whatever, to prevent the true love. Because in my book I go into cases where people were actually disrupted from true love, and so they had to really work at maintaining that connection. Kind of like in that movie, what was that movie? The Adjustment Bureau.
Yeah. That's a great example. Yes.
Some of those themes actually have come up in many of my own cases where they're actually true, they believe they're true soulmates and they really want to be together, but then their handlers or their aliens or whatever seem to be trying to disrupt them and set them up with other people, and sometimes disrupt them for years, and then when they realize, they're with the real person, they realize that they were disrupted all along, and it's kind of like a hindsight situation. So I'd say that there can be a good connection if both people are aware and really working on their stuff. So it really comes to like awareness and healing and emotional integrity and intelligence and, working on it, basically, amidst chaos and stuff. So, but in many of the cases, one partner or the other, they just weren't aware, or they just didn't have the resilience to deal with the disruption and interference. So that's why I'm really writing the book, so that, we want to nurture true love, and if we believe that there is divine forces bringing us together, which there can be, that we could nurture it and protect it.
And I want to invite the listeners out there to also feel free to post questions and comments. I'm watching. There's a lot of rapport on this subject coming from the chat, so I suspect that a lot of people who are listening to this tonight are kind of, I see the comments and there's great agreement on the subject we're talking about. So feel free to ask questions. If you do ask questions on the chat, put those in all caps for us so I can read them. Some of y'all are using some wild fonts on the chat boards. So.
I know this can stir up a lot of feelings for many people, like from just like outright rejection and anger to like, oh my God, or fear. But really, there's ways to tell, is this a true soulmate? Is this a counterfeit setup? Or is this being disrupted? And what can I do to nurture and protect this? Because a lot of times these connections are very, very powerful and they're really good. I mean, they're wonderful. But there's a dark side to it, too. So you just have to assess the situation with honesty without wanting too much to believe something, just allowing that perception to come in and not be too attached to any particular belief system. And I think that sometimes people attach themselves to, let's say, channeled entity information, which may tell them many things that they want to hear that makes them feel better, but in reality these entities are questionable or could be outright deceitful. And this is something that I went into with the Love Bite and with this book too, that many of the people, actually at least 2 case studies, they were channeling entities which were questionable and actually incongruent with what they were saying based on what their person was doing. So that's why I question now, like the channeled entity stuff and some of the exopolitics stuff, because the victims come to me. And you see this stuff on these websites and all this fancy, smancy, good-sounding, Galactic Federation stuff, and then
thank you.
The victims of Love Bites come to me, and really these are like reptilians masquerading as beings of light, and it's a big con job. So, it's my job just to help the victims and to help them discern appropriately and to heal so that they could protect themselves from malevolent forces. And unfortunately, the malevolent ones will masquerade. And so you have to really have a keen eye and awareness for that to protect yourself. And I look at this as like a shamanic initiation. I mean, what better test to really hone your spiritual skills and discernment, to be thrown into this and,
Yeah.
It's a test. It truly is a test. But really, even people who have experienced the Love Bite and gone through these extreme emotions and mystical, like, immersion with the beloved and profound ecstatic states can come out of this as someone who has realized deeper things about themselves, and it could be a positive outcome for the person who is dedicated to awakening and dedicated to healing and dedicated to awareness. So they have to be strong and resilient.
I have a question here on the Wolf Spirit chat board. It says, please ask Eve to explain the difference of people meeting for the first time and connecting, and say being abducted and put together several times, then meeting in real life. I hope that's clear.
So,
you have two people are meeting for the first time and connecting, versus, and I'm kind of retranslating here, versus, say, being abducted and put together several times and then meeting later in so-called real life. In other words, I guess that initial attraction that we would consider to be normal sexual chemistry between two people versus what's been implanted through several abduction scenarios.
And how can one tell? And actually, in the Love Bite book, there's definite case studies where this was demonstrated based on the memories of one or both partners and several, let's say, hypnotic regressions where they actually remembered and had confirming witness testimony of each other's story, that they indeed knew themselves to be bonded several times throughout childhood. They both had alien encounters throughout their life, and when they met, there was not only a deja vu, but then they started remembering, and then when they had regressions, it actually confirmed there was something very real and concrete. And that what I would call the alien love bite, right?
Right.
And so in the second case, it could be a matter of awareness, like someone who maybe is not very aware, but maybe they just feel it really strong. Maybe they just feel like this kind of sense of deja vu, and there are these magical things that make it feel like it's being orchestrated, but they're not quite sure. So it really is a matter of awareness. It may or may not be alien, conspired or whatever. But the more awareness will tell the person. And really, how it plays out, I mean, does it play out with a lot of, like, sudden paranormal activity and then increased alien encounters and weird chaos and, you know, the weirdness of it all? And, you know, if you read my book, you'll be able to tell. You'd be like, oh, okay, I can tell. But really, it depends on the awareness of the person. And sometimes you really do have a connection because it is a true soul connection. And those are wonderful and to be nurtured. And there can be supernatural interference with it not being negative. And so that's why when I defined the Dark Side of Cupid, there was like 3 out of 3 things, okay? The first would be the magical paranormal kind of stuff. The second one would be the emotional highs and lows or emotional vampirism. And the third one would be like the manipulation and psychopathology factor. Then if you have 2 of the 3, it's probably a Dark Side of the Cupid. So if you have the supernatural stuff alone without the energy vampirism and emotional highs and lows, then, you know, maybe it's just a wonderful soulmate connection, you know? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So that's why I defined it that way, so that people can kind of tell, they get a feel for it once they see the case studies, you know? So that was a good question, though, because sometimes you really don't know until it plays itself out.
Well, we live in a world now where everybody's becoming more guarded in terms of relationships. I guess it's the energy of the times. I don't think I'd want to be young and single anymore just because of the predatory nature of people in general, and that's just part of this period of time we're in.
Yeah, and it's almost as if things are playing themselves out, you know, to the nth degree, like dark becoming more dark and light becoming more light.
I've been saying that for a couple of years. Thank you, yes.
Yeah. And so that then you're able to recognize that which is further and further away from the divine connection and that which is closer and closer to the divine connection. And then you're able to recognize behaviors and, you know, what I call red flags of either situation. So it's good to know what the red flags are and then what your red flags are, you know, and many people that I've dealt with, especially people who've been through trauma, sometimes the red flags don't work for them because they've got what I call the blank spots inside them of unhealed wounds, which creates a disconnect with their core, with their emotional body, so that maybe they're not able to recognize on certain subtle levels that other people are going to just automatically deflect from, even on an unconscious level. So the red flags are real important to be able to identify and to feel and to develop that sensitivity.
Another question that came up, are people randomly picked to be victims or picked on by these entities? In other words, it's a random process.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I've had people who believed themselves to be randomly chosen, like, you know, many people who've had the alien abduction experience where they've had multiple histories, they always say, well, why me, you know? And then there's some who seem to be taken only once, and they seem to be opportunistic and thrown into a program. And then if you were a shaman, you would want to look deeper and say, well, maybe there was an agreement made or in a former life, or that this is a karmic thing. So it depends on your level of awareness and belief to say whether or not this is just a spontaneous, opportunistic thing. But I think some are opportunistic. Like, I mean, some predators are opportunistic. They may just choose the nearest person that looks like a good feed, you know? But I think they're more likely to choose someone who's an easy target, you know?
Well, let me reframe this last question, and I want to go into this a little bit with you because you've listened to the Steve Richard interview, and the word victim comes up often, and I don't want to diminish anyone's sense of being hurt or traumatized, because I don't think that's the case. But the word victim to me anymore is, to me, it's a red flag for a problem right away, because I think we have to identify something inside ourselves that's stronger than that word. That word victim carries a lot of baggage with it. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, it happens. I mean, with young children, things happen that are unfortunate, and things happen to adults that are unfortunate, and sometimes there are true victims of unfavorable circumstances, whether or not it's war or getting in accidents or whatever. Sometimes it happens. It's just not good to think of oneself as a victim for very long. I think healing brings empowerment, and that's a good thing. And I think the more we heal and the more we empower ourselves without self-delusion, the less of a victim we become or that we feel like. And so we have to be honest with ourselves, I mean, are these things still happening? Like many people who've had alien visitations, they don't want to call themselves abductees or consider themselves victims because it creates a cognitive dissonance of being disempowered and powerless. But if these things continue to happen, even if they don't want them to happen, then they're still victims until they figure out how to change the situation. So it really depends on awareness and finding new strategies to empower oneself so that these things don't happen. And what can I say? I think there are true victims, but then maybe there's something that they just don't know. Maybe there's a lack of awareness or knowledge which would help them if they knew what that was, to put them in a different situation.
So do you subscribe to the idea that we come into a life having chosen our course, and that the things that happen to us are either things that will traumatize us or make us stronger?
Well, I think it depends on the realization of each individual, and it has to be realized. I think that something must be deeply realized for someone to be able to make that assessment. I mean, we could have beliefs up the yin-yang, but until we have a realization, then it's only true to you according to that realization. But I know that even in my own life, there were certain ways of acting and feeling like a victim if I was not connected to my emotional body and taking responsibility for my own healing process. And once I took, quote, more responsibility for healing, learning how to communicate, working on healing, knowledge, awareness, tools, then I became less and less of a victim and didn't feel as much like one as I took more responsibility for healing. But it took a period of time, and it's not something that's an overnight process. Healing takes time, and healing does bring empowerment. But healing must occur for the victimization to decrease, in my view, with certain kinds of victimization. Like, if you keep being in abusive relationships, eventually, if it's a pattern, it's because they're doing something over and over again to incur the same kinds of things. But when you're a child, you can't help it. You're born into a situation.
I tend to think, based on, I guess, you're a counselor, you work with a pretty broad spectrum of people. I am exposed to people who reach out to me as a result of doing these shows. And statistically, I don't have that big a base of people, but I tend to think of the victims, and I use that term here as the person who is being acted upon, as largely being more female than male. Is that true or not true, or is that just my male narcissism kicking in?
Well, I know that females are more likely to report relationship issues and distress because they want to talk about it more, whereas males may want to keep it to themselves, or maybe they act it out more. But truly, in my case studies, I mean, there was always a male and female equally involved.
Okay.
Although it was 70% female who were the reporting partners. But truly, in reality, I would say it's 50-50 in terms of involvement. It's just that I think males are less likely to want to report something on an emotional level. They tend to be more private when it comes to, like, talking about emotional things. They just don't like to do it, So, but, in this society, though, as a patriarchal society, I think women are set up to be more victims, and men tend to be more perpetrators in this society based on patriarchy. And I think, if I even got on that whole subject, I would say that patriarchy itself is psychopathology.
And we can go there. I'm very interested in exploring that, because I've had I guess I've kind of had a sea change over the last few years in terms of spirituality and recognizing the malignancy of patriarchies and hierarchical structures. And
and even like who created... Now, I mean, when you think about the whole Gnostic archons, Yaltabeos, that kind of thing, and who created the belief systems and religions that were patriarchal in nature, it is diabolical in my view, because it basically disregards the power of the feminine, which actually has the power and the creative potential to heal and create harmony for all. And that when women are disempowered, a whole society is doomed to destruction. And that it will take the women to heal themselves, to heal the men, to heal the planet, because the women tend to have that in them more strongly. I mean, some Native Americans maybe believe that, but I see it all the time that there is a psychopathology in patriarchy itself, that any shaman or healer worth his quote, I don't know, anyone who really, really knows true shamanism and the powers inherent in men and women from a metaphysical, spiritual perspective, the males would know best to always respect a female and their power, because they truly have creative power that can go above and beyond the normal male. And many shamans and healers know this. And that's why, like in certain forms of Buddhism, the Dakini is highly revered, the female Dakini, because they have the power. So, but I'm not going to say they have more power. It's just that an egalitarian between males and females is certainly wiser and more harmonious for both.
Yeah, and
patriarchy is a disease.
I think that among the people that I've been around who are the most spiritually awakened at this point, there's an awareness, and it's coming as much from what I consider to be some very strong males, of this recognition of the absolute necessity of recognizing the feminine on every level, and even probably beginning at the spiritual aspect, because the feminine is the procreative aspect, and it's also the balancing aspect in terms of yielding versus strength,
absolutely.
The emotional depth, and it may be the reason why I tend to see more females identify as having had Milab or ET experiences, is because I am a male, and I've kind of been very open with my emotions and my feelings on the air. I communicate that, and I tend to find more females will open up to me than I get males. I do get that, but I don't see as many males as I do females, which kind of makes me wonder, are the men holding back, or are women really the targets right now?
Well, it's probably both. It's conditioning to disconnect from emotions sometimes for men, but in terms of like divine connection, the feminine attribute would be more likely to be receptive and yielding, which is a good characteristic to have in order to allow the yielding and reception of the divine consciousness. So it's easier to realize and connect to divine consciousness through a yielding and receptive mode, whereas through a more directed, ego-based, less receptive, they're not going to be able to tap into that divine power and that divine essence and consciousness as easily unless they go into a yielding nature. So like in Buddhism, they talk all about, what needs to happen in order for us to realize that Buddha's consciousness, whatever you want to call it. And so much of it is about letting go of attachments, letting go of ego, and yielding to that nature which already exists within us. It's already there. It's just yielding to it and allowing oneself to receive it. So somehow it's easier for women because it's more their natural nature to be more receptive. So maybe that's why it's more easy for women to be psychic, for example. Many of them, there's more psychics who are women than men. Mm-hmm. And they're infinitely more aware on intuitive, psychic, emotional levels. I mean, it's like the difference between a human sense of smell and a dog's sense of smell. Women are infinitely much more perceptive for the most part, although there are some men who are very, very perceptive. But it's just their nature. So like a woman's intuition is usually pretty good unless she's got a lot of issues and projecting all over the place. But, you know.
Let's, I want to take a break here. And before we do that on this side of the show, give out your website and the information on your book and how people can find your book.
Okay, well, you can always go to my website, which is evelorgen.com, and go to the news section. We'll have more of the updated information on my book, how to order it. You could also go to my publisher's website. It's keyholepublishing.com. And the ebook is out in Kindle now, and the hard copy should be shipped hopefully by next week. So the hard copy should be out definitely this month, so that's a good thing. And that's the easiest way to get in touch with me. And I'm also on Facebook as Eve Lorgen or Evie Lorgen. So.
Okay, excellent. And those links will be posted as well on the website. We're going to take a break here, and we'll come back and catch up a little bit more. I got some more things I want to talk about with my guest, Eva Lorgen, here on Offplanet Radio. We will be back in a few minutes.
This is Offplanet Radio.
Welcome to another dimension, a dimension of understanding. You are entering a place where reality collides with truth. There are no limits, there are no boundaries. This is Offplanet Radio.
Welcome back to the other side of Offplanet Radio Live for Wednesday, August 1st. I'm Randy Moggins, and we're going to jump right back into it again. My guest, Eva Lorgen, is on the line, and you're there, right, Eva?
I'm here.
You are here. All right. We're batting 500 tonight. Anyway, some interesting questions coming through the chats, and I want to honor that. We were talking a little bit, we kind of closed out talking about the feminine in the second half, which I think is an important subject. I kind of asked you off mic about Milabs and what that is and how you view the Milab experience versus what we consider to be the pure alien abduction encounters, scenarios. Maybe give us your understanding, your background on what Milabs is and how it differs from what we consider to be pure alien abduction scenarios.
Well, I came across military abductions. Actually, I classify a Milab, quote, as a classic alien abductee who also experiences human military involvement at some level. And that's how I define it, although there may be some people who think that it's only human military. And, you know, some military, maybe some people only have that kind of experience. But what I learned actually came from the understanding of what Dr. Carla Turner started bringing to light in her book called Taken. And, of course, she's no longer with us, but she was the one bold enough to really bring things to light, that there were, genuine alien abductees who had classic, like alien gray or whatever types of entities, but they also had a military element visiting them, sometimes involving them in some kind of medical experimentation or interrogation about what the aliens were doing to them, or more often than not, what I saw within my own support group and the people that I talked to is that many of these Milab abductees were also used as a type of operative or Manchurian candidate under a kind of mind control for military that were working in conjunction with aliens and using alien technology. And those are the ones that I actually interact with and hear from more than maybe just the classic MK Ultra where there's no aliens involved at all. And I truly believe that there are non-human alien types of beings that are interacting with human military and other covert groups, whether it's a breakaway civilization or a shadow government, whatever you want to call it. There are those who I think who have made liaisons and Faustian bargains in exchange for technology, and they've been doing this for a long time. And so those are the ones that I hear from. And so I hear what they report. Sometimes it's a love bite setup, where they're not sure if it was the aliens who did it or the military, and sometimes it was the military who did it. And sometimes they, let's say, set them up with a partner so that they could do ops or mind-controlled black operations with another partner who they work with together for some kind of job. And it depends on the person and their capabilities and talents, how they're used. But very often, women were used, for example, as a psychic to do remote viewing, for example, or they were used to spy and get information in foreign countries or whatever about some other terrorist faction or something, or they're there to get alien technology from different aliens, and then the military want to, extract the information of them that they got from the aliens or whatever. But it appears that they're operatives under a kind of mind control in an alter personality state. So I believe that many of the Milabs that I've come across who are, quote, alien abductees have been traumatized at some point in their life, whether it's aliens or military or both, that they're split, dissociated, and programmed so that they have parts of them that have capabilities that can operate under the flip of a switch or a trigger in an alter personality mode to carry out a certain operation according to their military handler or even alien handlers. A lot of times the female Milabs that we talked to, for example, they had like a reptilian handler, and that was their, handler. So there's different kinds of situations, but it seems to exist together. It's not an either-or situation.
Yeah, I guess for me it was just a matter of making the differentiation between what we saw years ago, which was the classic abduction scenario, and what's emerged in research in probably the last decade, which seems more and more, and it's becoming compelling to me, more and more overlapped in terms of almost everything now points to people who have memories that are consistent with Milabs as opposed to a pure alien abduction scenario. Presence of military figures, presence of weight-coated lab technicians, memories of underground bases. Right. I've had people recount to me memories of encountering beings that were part of genetic crossbreeding experiments, alien-human, animal in some cases. Mm-hmm. And do you hold a lot of credence to the idea that there was this, what's called the Greta Treaty, which was supposedly Eisenhower back in 1952 or 1953, having gone out to Andrews Air Force Base and met with aliens that, it's a complex story, there's no documentation for it, but it's been recounted many times of how basically Eisenhower wanted to make a deal with benevolence who were to protect us and help promote peace, and instead the military made the deal with the reptilians and the Greys.
Well, it appears there have been agreements and liaisons made with different beings in the more recent past. I mean, since the 1940s, but probably even before then. But it seems to me there's different factions. Like there's definitely a malevolent faction of entities that are associated with what I call the darker Illuminati families, who invoke and pay homage to these blood-sacrificing types of lizard entities or other, what do you call, incorporeal beings that they invoke, and in exchange, I guess, these beings will give them power, but maybe they need blood sacrifice or energy in some way, in exchange. And then those ones, I think, are the more malevolent ones, because of the secret societies, and they became controlling over certain corporations and government, shadow government, pharmaceutical, military, many different kinds of corporations, which have become huge entities controlled by certain ruling families, who are under the reptilians, who are under the Draco, kind of, sort of. I mean, that's like basic, although there are other kinds of beings who have visited and apparently, maybe made agreements, but it's very complex, actually, because I think that not all factions now maybe really agree with or like what's happening, and they're starting to see the dark picture of how these entities have basically taken them for a ride, and it's just not a good situation for humanity, in my view. Not based on what I observe with the people coming to me and reporting what they report to me. I mean, there's obviously a lot of trauma and torture and malevolent stuff and occult black magic involved, and, high alien technology, nanotechnology, and, mind control, and even soul snatching and pulling out their consciousness out of their bodies and putting them in clone bodies or other bodies or different kinds of things like that. I mean, it's definitely high technology that appeared to come from aliens or these other incorporeal beings that had been invoked through maybe black magic, and some of it maybe even go back as far as ancient Atlantis, or even I read about the Dr. John Dee, who did the Enochian magic rituals, who invoked the macro pan-dimensional beings, which were quite active within the British rule and the whole MI5 and 007 kind of stuff, and the whole transhuman agenda through these beings who require human bloodshed as part of the deal. So there are some dark beings who have made connections with humans in high places. So we know that. But then there's others who claim that it's not that. So apparently there's different groups doing different things. So some, quote, abductees may be only taken by certain aliens for the aliens' agenda, which maybe the military don't know about. And then there's others who the military take for their own agenda. So it's really complex, actually.
Yeah. One of the things I wanted to ask you is, do you seem to be able to identify the involvement of people involved in Milabs as being part of military families? I see a pattern where there's a military background with a lot of these people. Yes,
I do see that. Let's say where there was Illuminati connection, or I don't even like to use the word, some fraternal organizations who invoke certain non-human entities that feed on human life force energy. Or sometimes it's strictly a genetic thing, and that they're sheep-dipped because of their genetics that they were targeted. So some of them appear to be just for genetics, and others definitely are part of a bloodline where there was a connection made via an occult thing. Like when Steve Richards talked about that in one of his cases, where he had a case where a man had a reptilian lizard entity that was attached to him, and he was able to trace it back to a Freemason involvement in that family lineage, which gave that entity permission through the bloodline. Like, for example, a lot of times in certain high-level degrees, they'll take the firstborn. The firstborn is theirs. Yes. So that means their children end up in these projects. And more often than not, I mean, I see a lot of Milabs, and I can't give you numbers, but many of them have had parents in aerospace, military intelligence, NSA, FBI, CIA, or occult ritual families, Illuminati families. So there seems to be like an entity involved with some of these larger corporations where, in order to maintain the power and the secrecy and the security, they secure that by keeping their high-level people in these fraternal organizations run by incorporeal entities who feed on life force energy, quote unquote. So that's how they keep the power. That's how they keep the power in the family, in the companies, and under control. And so I guess in these families, it's like firstborn's theirs, the children's theirs, and these children end up in these projects, and they're like just born into it, you know?
Yeah,
and it could be genetics also, so...
That seems to go back into ancient times as well, the idea of the firstborn. That actually goes into Molech's sacrifice that's recorded in the Hebrew Bible, and this idea that is the chosen one, and that is the one that's basically put out there as the sacrifice to the gods, which doesn't look all that much different to me than what we have now.
Yeah, I think it might be some of the same stuff. I mean, these entities are ancient. They're probably doing the same kinds of things under different window dressings, different cultural notations and names. So that's why it's good to look at archetypes and cultural myths and figures in myths, and to find out if there's any similarities in what we're seeing. And I believe that's true. You know, I believe that maybe they're associated with some of these ancient gods who had certain characteristics, you know. And it appears that way, that there's some kind of control over certain families. Although I've heard it said that certain bloodlines are chosen or manipulated so that there is an ease of them being overshadowed, possessed by the, quote, reptilian beings or other entities like draconians, where their genetics are specifically manipulated so there's a greater ease of possession, parasitism, overshadowing, whatever you want to call it. And this is something that actually I mentioned through an interview with this Scandinavian Milab abductee named Marit, who talked about how she is a genetic hybrid, or her genetics were altered and manipulated to incorporate alien consciousness in a human body and a human hybrid body. Mm-hmm. That somehow it's not just about DNA triplet codes, that's physical and biochemical. There's a frequency thing also. So there's a frequency aspect which has to be, it's kind of complicated, resonant, and able to carry a genetic signature, so that it's hard to explain. There is a consciousness, there's an alien consciousness. Right,
there's a resonance pattern in certain people that makes it more easy to superimpose, or what you call overshadow.
Right, right. And that there is a genetics that can be switched on, for example. Certain genetics that have been already, quote, spliced in, let's say, for example, that becomes switched on once the alien consciousness or overshadowed entity is fully integrated in that spirit, soul, mind, body container. So all these things have to work together for it to be effective. So that's why it's not just genetic, it's also very spiritual and frequency oriented and energy oriented.
Do you find that there are particular genetic markers, and I'm thinking here of blood types, eye color, certain ethnic groups that seem to be more targeted than others?
Yes. And this is something that Nigel Kerner actually talked about in two of his books, where he talked about the white Caucasian Aryan race is more easily genetically manipulatable because of a lack of melanin in the cells, and that certain indigenous cultures were not as able to become manipulated.
You still there? Okay. It looks like... there we go.
Did we get cut off?
We kind of got... something dropped out there. Yeah.
Should I repeat what I said?
Yeah, you talked about, what Nigel had brought up about the melatonin and...
Yeah. And I don't know the exact quote. It's just that melanin strands are covering the DNA in indigenous and black-colored people, so that when these melanin strands are surrounding the chromosomal material, it is not as easy to genetically pull out, and certain genes and stuff is just messier. So that he believes that the white race was created, and so that it's easier to manipulate genetically. But there's also other factors like which have been common, like the Rh negative factor, where women in particular, the female abductees, may be, let's say, impregnated with a hybrid human alien child, and because they're Rh negative, there's less of a, the immune reaction.
Right, yeah.
That happens.
Yeah.
And so they maybe use them, and I've heard it said that that's actually related to the reptilian and Draco lines. And so that's one thing. And then autoimmune disorders is maybe a result of some of that genetic tampering. So a lot of, abductees, female abductees in particular, have a lot of unusual health issues, allergies, autoimmune kind of things going on, and skin conditions. And there was another man who has sent me articles that I put on my website. His name is Matt R. That's his, what he uses as a name, but he talked about how he has reptilian genetics that are being switched on that happened more suddenly after an abduction, where some kind of medical procedure was done that switched on some genes rather suddenly, with changes in skin, changes in sensitivity, changes in rapid changes, which he believes is like a switching on of some kind of reptilian genetics. So this kind of thing is happening.
A question came up in the chat room on Wolf Spirit Radio. They asked, Eve seems to be aware of many ETs. Has she had any contact with non-human beings? If so, could she explain her contact?
I guess I have, but I don't really want to go into detail.
Sure, I understand.
The usual alien greys, mantises, Nordic types, military, the usual ones, really, and then some other ones that I'm not sure who they were. I wouldn't really say, but they were white, very light-skinned, with large blue almond-shaped eyes,
almost
and no
like
hair.
The tall whites.
No, tall whites are different. The tall whites actually look like a tall white gray, and those are different than the ones that I saw.
Nordics?
The ones that. Yeah.
It
was kind of Nordic, but it really wasn't Nordic. I mean, I'm not sure what it called itself, but this particular being communicated telepathically by downloading like a series of files to show a story and a communication. And this happened several years ago in response to a case I was working on, and they wanted to give me some background information, and so they just gave me a file and a communication, how they communicated. So it depends, on the situation. A lot of times the ones that I've had are more interdimensional in nature. That's how I perceived it. So, why would I be motivated to do this unless I've had experience myself? And actually, I'm very much interested and involved in the research of Dr. Corrado Malanga, and have worked with the sessions that he created to delete alien interference and get clearer on what's really happening on more subtle levels. So I've worked with those sessions, not only having it done to me, but helping others now. So I kind of adopted a lot of his views based on what I've observed over the years, which it's kind of like it's not just a physical phenomenon. It appears to be an interference on many different levels of mind, spirit, soul, and of course body, and subtle energy interference and implants, and what I call the alien parasitism kind of thing. So there's many different things going on.
Yeah, somebody on the chat was commenting on the Bloodline, and it says the Bloodline meme is just weird racism to me. Well, I'll address that and say it is racism. If you go back through the history of racism, you're going to find that it begins with the elites, and I think that this is actually part of this whole entire thing that we're talking about.
Even Nigel Kerner was pretty direct in his views, because, of course, the original, when they, did the genetic, the mitochondrial Eve, where they trace back the mitochondrial DNA to the original female human, it is an African-American woman of about 200,000 years ago, more or less, of our most recent, where we came from. So there's definitely an origin of black indigenous humans, and then somehow the whites got involved, and like, where did they come into the picture, and why is there so much Aryan dominance, and of course the Nazis and stuff. And I think the Nazis were involved with some pretty malevolent beings, alien beings.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
So I think there's definitely racism. I mean, I've had conversations with African American and indigenous people who are abductees, who have very unique bloodline situations, and they are assailed by a lot of things because of their bloodline, and like they're very, very sensitive, very, very psychic, very connected to the earth. And I think that the more people are connected to the earth, like Steve Richards talks about with the Aboriginal connection, the more you're connected with the original indigenous sense of being, with connection with the earth and connection with the divine planet, like this deep knowing that doesn't have to be elaborated on with all these religious dogma.
Right.
I think there are some races who may have a better innate connection. The Native Americans, I mean, a lot of abductees, at least in America, and maybe America and Canada, many of them have some Native American mix in them, and we wonder, is that what they're looking for? There's some kind of connection they're looking for with a Celtic Native American mix, or many different Native American strands in some people, and why they keep taking certain abductees and certain bloodlines. They come to find out that they've got some Native American thing going on in there.
Yeah.
And is that what they're looking for? Is that what they're trying to find certain genes, or I don't know.
Yeah, it seems like in some cases, and I know Duncan's talked about this being, half Native American and half Celtic, and how that's kind of like the perfect storm, because they're tapping into, I guess, two root races in a sense. Yeah.
And there could be, I mean, gosh, there's so much genetic tampering. There must be something to it. Although racism, that's a very bad thing. I think we need to be honorable to all races, and we're all humans,
Yeah, and the racism card has been played by the elites. I mean, I'm thoroughly convinced of that. I grew up around people who, I hate to say this, were racist. And I grew up just in my heart of hearts knowing that was wrong. To me, that always felt wrong. And I think that's part of a higher consciousness as well, when you get to the place where you recognize and appreciate the differences between men and women, between different races. I mean, that's really, for me, where the rubber hits the road in terms of humanity.
The higher consciousness part. It's just awareness. Like, many people who are coming to greater awareness can recall being different races in other lifetimes, or being the opposite sex. And once you realize this, it's like, I could be born anything, So it really doesn't matter. You just have to honor what you have and do the best with what you have and go from there.
The other thing I wanted to talk about, because this comes up a lot, and it came up on the chat as well, about how they identify young children and testing that's going on certainly in public schools. And I'll just preface this by saying it was the first conversation that I ever had with Duncan, off mic, how people were tested and selected. I mean, I remember being tested for things that didn't make sense as... Oh, really? Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. That's a conversation that had come up in our, quote, abductee support groups, where we kind of inadvertently figured it out, where, like, for example, and this might be just one example, where we were in a school situation, let's say in the 60s or the 70s,
yes,
and they did their usual eye tests and hearing tests and different things, and then, like, during the hearing test, they would be like, well, you can hear that? You can hear that? Then they'd come and you'd have to go a second and a third time, because they found out you had a higher sensitivity to certain sounds or frequencies. And that was just one of the things that we figured out, or being chosen for certain gifted children things in the school, that kind of thing.
Testing that went beyond it, even to the point where several people have recalled being separated out and then put into a room where images were flashed at them, or symbol recognition, or high-level math skills, or language skills. Now, we're not talking about middle schoolers or high schools. We're talking about children in first and second grade in the 1960s and the 1970s. And it's what Duncan identified as Project Talent. And Project Talent, if you go on to projecttalent.org, there's something there that masquerades as Project Talent today. It was a best and brightest. It was only high schoolers, and it's a complete cover-up from what was really going on, because there's so much anecdotal evidence out there, Eva, that I'm convinced that that's what they were doing. They were basically screening a broad spectrum of elementary people in that time. What I tend to believe, and I have no proof, it's just that this information keeps coming up, that they were probably screening at that point for Milabs.
I think so. I mean, even, I don't know what to say. I remember my father, we used to work for Lockheed, and I had gotten on many conversations with others whose, let's say, parents were in aerospace who were involved in projects like Andrew Basaggio, for example, and how he talked about how he was shown the ESP cards where, the wavy lines and the circle and the star and the square, and then they would be asked to guess the thing to assess their psychic ability. And I even remember my dad coming home with a deck of cards from Lockheed testing us. When we were teenagers.
Yeah, what was that in the 60s? This whole ESP craze kicked in, and we had the Kreskin ESP with the pendulum thing and all the cards, and I mean, Ouija boards were really quite popular back then.
Yeah, and I think nowadays maybe they don't have to do that. They probably have other higher tech means of finding that information. You know?
Well, we've got computers and people reporting all kinds of things on Facebook and blogs and websites. It's kind of ongoing now. We're self-reporting now.
Yeah, and they're probably programmed to self-report as well. Yeah, it makes you wonder. All this technology, I'm wondering if it's really that good for us. That even this transhumanism thing, that, I mean, from what I'm hearing from some Milabs, for example, that the nanotechnology or nanoparticles are being used as transmitters or to help augment some of the alien technology and communication systems, in my view, that they're trying to create kind of like a bionic super soldier with alien technology inside them. I think that's basically what they're doing in some of these high-tech, I don't like to call it super soldier, but super warrior or augmented humans with alien technology in them for some kind of, greater capability than the average human.
Yeah.
I think technology augments that, and they have a way of affecting our consciousness with computers and iPhones and cell phones and all the wireless communication. Those frequencies actually affect our brain. And so anybody who is involved with meditation, that they may notice how they feel when using technology versus being away from technology, and that it actually affects our consciousness and our ability to, I think, tap into the divine. And that's why technology is not good to be around it. It does affect you, and protect oneself from too much technology.
No, I'm there. I mean, there's times when I have to take breaks now. I have to get away from it. I have a friend out in L.A. who's a radio talk show host, James Martinez, and James recommends doing a 2-week media fast, cutting it off completely, everything. And he's actually done that. What he does is he goes to Peru, and he goes through a media fast and goes into a spiritual retreat mode. And I can tell you, I was in a McDonald's on Monday night meeting with someone, and these public restaurants now and cafes and Wi-Fi hotspots are pumping mega Wi-Fi signal loops through these public facilities. I was in this McDonald's. I was starting to get disoriented from what they were pumping through the atmosphere in this place.
I mean, I would, I mean, I think it's not good. They do have some technology devices now that supposedly help modulate the frequency of certain things. Whether or not they really work, I don't know, but I've come across that. A client told me about some, I don't remember the name of the company, but I could look it up later. But they'll help modulate the frequency of that wireless so that it's beneficial and not harmful to your auric field. And they show pictures of before and after your auric field, like when you're using these protection devices. So hopefully there's going to be more and more things developed so that it doesn't affect us, because cell phones, we know, can give brain cancer and different kinds of cancer if you're on your cell phone too much.
Well,
kind of getting off topic, but,
We are off topic, but that's okay because it's a conversation, and we're getting feedback from people as we're going along. It's, people are resonating with this. And it's not unrelated because it shows how we're being altered and how as a culture we've been altered and indoctrinated for something that I really more and more think is very nefarious, very dark, and designed to alter humanity in a way that would remove the spiritual connection. And even more, lately I've had this thought that we're being prevented from what we would call ascension, this being able to initiate contact with higher self, the activation of higher DNA triggers, and all of that.
Yeah, I believe that's true. I mean, I knew this from the beginning when I started working with people, when people wanted to get more aware about what's happening with their alien abductions or military stuff, and then when they would go try to see a therapist, they would be assailed with all this disruption and distraction and spiritual warfare, psychic attacks. So it was plain and clear that they didn't want expanded awareness, but only the awareness that they wanted, which would be their psychic communications or whatever. Because, you could receive things psychically just from implants, and then it'd be the false information that you think is your higher self, and it's really like an alien entity. So there's like different kinds of technology they could use to make you think you're having contact with, a spirit guide or whatever. So it pays to clear your mind, do meditation retreats, and get really clear on who you are and be away from technology just to get clear.
How do people who are chipped or people that are in any way implanted, because not all implants are physical chips. There are implants that are made on the astral body as well, inside the DNA structure and everything else. How do you deal with that? How do people get away long enough to retune?
Well, and this is some of the work that Dr. Corrado Malanga has developed to delete interference on different levels. Like, say, there's the hardware, let's say there's physical implants, and then there's energetic ones that are associated with a more energy frequency thing, and then there's the alien parasite incorporeal beings, which are limited and have alive and have their own kind of consciousness. So this method that he's developed is a way to connect with your own soul spirit, and then use that connection to reintegrate all those aspects of being, and then assess where these implants are, and then delete them and deactivate them through your own power, your own connection to soul. Because what apparently these aliens are doing is kind of doing a disconnect, so you don't have a connection between mind, spirit, soul as clearly, so that you're not able to access higher self, but then you end up accessing the alien active memory or the alien communication, and you're thinking it's a spirit guide, and it's really like them. So you have to really clear your energy field to make sure you're getting like the still small voice, which is like the essence of who you really are. Mm-hmm. So that was like a mind opener for me to really see what they were doing and then how to clear that. So it's kind of a shamanic procedure, but it's also using basic hypnotherapeutic techniques and archetypal language to reconnect with those parts of yourself that are the powerful, aware parts, and then get a reconnect going on, and then deleting the interference through your own power, which we do have. And I think that we're conditioned to think we don't have the power, and this is all technology, therefore we're powerless and can't do anything unless we have some kind of advanced physics degree and all these like super-duper gizmos to protect us. We really don't need that. We need our soul power and our spirit power. Mm-hmm. And if that's strong enough, and if that connection is strong enough, and we do the healing work, we can be more immune to these kinds of things. So I think it's an empowering thing, because when we look at it from a technology viewpoint, it kind of throws us into a disempowered state by thinking, oh, well, the aliens are so intelligent, we just couldn't possibly know what they know, and so therefore, their technology is superior and we can do nothing. Well, that's not really true. Our soul power and our consciousness is actually superior. Otherwise, they wouldn't be messing with us. And that's my belief.
Yeah, and more I think that's the thing they don't want us to know, is the power that we hold, of how powerful we are. There's something about humanity that has attracted a lot of attention out there.
Yeah, and really we have to look at our belief systems, our religions, who manipulated and corrupted them to make us believe certain things which really put us at a disadvantage, to look at, for example, look for deity outside of ourselves. And you continue, and then it just sets us up to be manipulated and led astray by these gods who are playing all kinds of games, and they seem to be in a different realm of reality, and they're in a different form than we are, and maybe their experience is completely different than our human experience. But I think the human experience is very unique and powerful. And at least in Buddhist understanding, and this is what I know from Buddhism, that humans are in one of the 6 realms of existence. Like there's 6 different realms and types of beings in different realms of existence. But of those 6, being in the human experience is the one that can allow them to realize the higher consciousness of non-duality, omniscience, where we came from, whereas the other realms, which include the gods and the titans and the demigods and the hungry ghosts and the demons, they don't have that ability in that form or realm of existence. Therefore, we do have something superior, although maybe we don't appear as intelligent or live as long, maybe as some of these other beings, like these titans, or what do you want to call them. So there is something unique and very powerful about being human that we have that I think these other beings don't have in that form or realm of existence.
I think we've been dumbed down. I think all of the things you mentioned, our institutions, our religions, our spiritual structures have all lied to us about who we really are, even in terms of our longevity, the activation of our DNA, the activation of higher self and intelligence. You know, if you go back and you study ancient history, humanity looks like, certainly from the time of Atlantis, it looks like we were in a godlike state, and somehow we fell from that state.
Yeah, something happened, and there was long lifespans, and then they got shorter and shorter. So it makes you wonder, what happened, and it would be nice if we had a full history of what really happened.
Yeah, well, I think we will someday. I think that's the arc that we're on as a civilization right now, and I think that's why there is all this spiritual warfare out there.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, but it's real. I know it's real, and I think our belief systems actually prevent us from having clear awareness, and we have to be not attached to any particular belief system, so that we allow our own innate divine consciousness to perceive clearly. It's kind of like we can't be attached to a particular belief system. And that also prevents us from actually perceiving clearly and purely. And it's our belief systems that actually block us sometimes. Yeah. We're our own worst enemies sometimes that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. As we kind of get ready to close out the show tonight, I know you have your website up, and I see that you do a lot of work with people, and there may be people out there in this audience that would be curious to know how you work, what you do, how you help people who are in any situation, trauma-based, Milabs, or abduction scenarios. You want to talk about that a little bit, Eva?
Sure. It seems like much of my work since I started with alien abduction research had been moving more and more towards love relationship, anomalous interference on that level. But I also have a master's in counseling psychology, so that much of my training is in relationship counseling and communication skills, what I call compassionate communication skills, but also the paranormal shamanic realm and hypnotherapeutic stuff. So I kind of work with a broad range of things and incorporate my counseling and relationship history, and I actually work with abductees with that kind of counseling skill too, because I think a lot of people in the alien abduction ufology, all they think is, oh, well, I'll just get a regression, that'll be it, and they'll get to know their memories and everything's going to be hunky-dory, but that's really not how true healing works. I think people need to understand what healing really is and what a commitment it takes, and it's a much more multidimensional endeavor.
Absolutely.
That involves much more than a simple hypnotic regressions to pull out memories. In fact, I wouldn't even suggest that. I suggest removing interference, building your strength, deepening your soul connection, and then things will naturally unravel from there, from a base of strength.
So you're not a fan of regression therapy?
Not necessarily. I don't think it really accomplishes much, especially if alien interference is a constant issue, because when alien interference and mind control is a constant issue, you may just get what they want you to remember, and it's just a constant game, and then they keep coming back and nothing really changes except you found out maybe what happened a few times. Unless the person is really good and they really work on empowering, kinds of skills.
Yeah, that's kind of what
I think the interference, because this issue is really not about extraterrestrials just doing physical things to people. There's a spiritual component that's undeniable in my view, and you have to deal with it that way.
So tell us again where you can find us and also the information on your book.
Well, you can find me at evelorgen.com, which is also alienlovebite.com. That's easier to remember. I'm also on Facebook as Eve Lorgen, Dark Side of Cupid. I created a new page. I'm also on Twitter, and so I always put updates on my website more often, and Facebook. So you can contact me through the web contact form on my website if you want to contact me through email. You can also do that. So that's pretty clear.
And, yep, and we'll link all of that up with the show as well. I want to thank you for coming on, Eva.
Thank you.
Stay on the line, and I'll talk to you when I close the show out.
Okay.
Just a reminder again, listeners, next week live, Adam Go Rightly will be here. You can find him at adamgorightly.com if you want to know more about that. I'll post some information this weekend. We have a lot of things going on the website now, and we are undergoing a website redesign, so you may see some changes as well in the next few weeks. Thanks to everybody on the chat room, and thanks to you who hear this show in the future of the ever-present now. I'm Randy Moggins. This is Off-Planet Radio. The truth is out there. It's inside you. Keep looking for it. We'll be back again next week.
How do you define normal?
This is Offplanet Radio.
Okay, thanks for